Chapter 691, Goodbye 1. I've managed to pay off everything. It didn't really cost much, and we still have a lot of money. Stepping out of the inn where we were staying, Anne casually tossed the bag of coins in her hand, the clinking sound echoing in the air as several people glanced her way. She paused mid-step, then turned to glance at Anaz, who stood a short distance away. His face was still dazed, as if his thoughts hadn't yet caught up with everything that had happened. She clicked her tongue and mumbled, "Get over it." Looking at Anaz, I felt a little bit of pity for him. How could he get over it so quickly? A couple of days had passed since the incident, and from time to time, Anaz would suddenly stop before looking at the air with the same dazed expression. This annoyed Anne to no end as she continuously clicked her tongue. I'm also a victim. In the end, ignoring him, she turned to look at me. What next? What next? Indeed, what next? My job here was done. There was nothing else left for me to do. I could finally go back. But, looking around, and staring in the direction of Anaz and Anne, I could only quietly sigh. I could tell at a glance that the two of them were probably not going to follow me back to the Empire. I will probably be heading back. The area around us paused for a moment as Anaz snapped out of his daze. Eventually, however, Anne spoke. With that partner of yours. Staring at Anne's face and seeing the subtle smirk on her face, I could only force out a smile. Yes. Anne's lips curled a little more, but she held back whatever words were forming. In the end, she simply lifted her head, her gaze drifting up to the dull gray sky that loomed above. Her expression turned a little complex. I'm not sure what I'll do. I think I'll probably use my cut to repair the ship and hire more crew members for my ship. We did lose quite a bit of them during the entire situation. Even though we were further away from Zahirl, several of my crewmates were still affected. So you'll still be a pirate? But of course, Anne answered with a matter-of-fact expression. It's the most lucrative job out there, and with both Silas and another one of the 7 lords gone, a new space opened up. There's a lot of money to be made, and, well, this is all that I pretty much know how to do. I like being a pirate. I see. I couldn't argue with her words. After spending so much time with her and the crew as Lazarus, I knew just how deeply she cared for them and how much she loved the sea. It was a part of her. Expecting her to do anything else would have felt wrong, unnatural, even. Then what about you? Slowly turning my head, I looked at Anaz, who seemed to have snapped out of it, his eyes eventually turning towards a tall spire in the distance. His face turned complicated. I've actually been contacted by the members of the church. They've offered me a good position there. Oh, yes, that made sense. While Anaz no longer seemed obsessed with the church, he still had attachments to it. If he wanted to stay in the mirror dimension, this would probably be the best thing for him. Are you going to take it? I've already accepted it. I opened my mouth, but found the words stripped away. In the end, I just smiled. As expected, both of them want to stay here. I had mixed feelings about this. Having spent quite a bit of time with them, I had grown attached to the two of them. However, I could not force them to come with me. Furthermore, the person that whom the two of them were more attached was Lazarus, not me. The lingering feelings of Lazarus still remained with me, and to him, the two of them were the two people who had influenced his life the most. They were the only two people that Lazarus could call friends in his small, yet impactful life. And for that reason, I didn't insist or say anything more. To Lazarus, they were his everything, but to me, they were merely passing winds that I would eventually have to part with. It was time for me to say goodbye. I guess it looks like the two of you have everything sorted. Yeah, we do. An awkward silence filled the space as we stood staring at each other. In the end, it was Anaz who broke the silence. I can tell that you don't belong here. You should also be leaving by today, right? Yeah, I see. Anaz nodded faintly, looking at Anne, who pursed her lips. Then, with a thin smile on his lips, Anaz clenched his fist. Hell yeah! Anaz suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, his face flushed red with excitement. Hold on. What was happening? Staring at the suddenly excited Anaz, I was left at a total loss for words. Why was he shouting? No, why did he look so excited? I didn't need to wait long to get my answer as Anas's smile grew wide and he pointed at me. Do you have any idea of how much I've suffered because of you, Not only did you drag me all across to the remnant south, but I've also been targeted by a primordial ranked being, was chased by one of the 7 lords, and even nearly died a couple of times. Now that you're gone, I'm finally free. Anaz suddenly started cackling like crazy. almost to the point where he sounded like Kira. Kakaka. My lip twitched at the sight as I turned to look at Anne, who blinked her eyes slowly before bringing her finger to her lips. Now that I think about it, you're right. How much did the two of us suffer? She sounded quite emotional. In fact, it looked like she was choking up. The fuck? We're free. We're finally free. Without warning, they wrapped themselves in a tight embrace, murmuring the same words over and over like some sort of broken record. Watching them, my face crumpled up, and I couldn't help but click my tongue again and again. Where was the emotional farewell that I had planned? Forget it. Fuck them. Flipping them off, I turned around and waved my hand in annoyance. Whatever. You're free. Be happy now that I'm gone. Tisk. He's leaving. Ha ha ha. The two of them continued to laugh as I marched ahead, entering the crowd in the distance. I continued to walk forward like that until their voices completely faded from my ears, and finally came to a stop. That was when I suddenly smiled and shook my head. Those two. I sighed. I guess this type of goodbye isn't so bad after all. Looking up at the sky once more, I touched my face before eventually turning to face a different direction. Finally, it was time for me to go back. He's gone. Yup, he's gone. Staring in the direction of where Lazarus had disappeared, the expressions of joy on both Anne and Annis's faces faded. From the start, neither of the two was actually happy about him leaving. Especially Anaz, who looked in the direction where Lazarus had left with a complicated expression. Although they hadn't known each other for very long, his life had changed drastically since meeting him. While it was true that he had encountered all sorts of trouble and even died multiple times, it was also true that he had grown a lot since then. With Zahir gone, Anaz remembered everything. He remembered everything that happened in the sinful strait and the words that Lazarus had once told him. Grow. Indeed, he had to grow. He couldn't remain like he was in the past. As such, he had to let go of Lazarus. Anaz understood more than ever that he couldn't allow himself to worship others, or follow them. He had to focus on himself, and himself only. The reason why he decided to accept the church's offer wasn't because he was still obsessed with them. The reason was that this was the path that Anaz realized would benefit him the most in his growth. He knew that he could climb higher, and becoming a Luminarch was probably not going to be hard anymore. But he wasn't satisfied with that anymore. Anaz wanted to grow even further. He wanted to grow to the point where he could be like the saint, and help those who were once like him. It was a silly goal, but it was at least a goal. He no longer wanted to be in the church for the goddess. He wanted to be there to help those who needed to grow. Just like how Lazarus had once helped him. This was his goal, and he planned on fulfilling it. Anaz would have never thought he'd act and think like this in the past, but all the experiences had changed him to become who he was today. And for that, he was thankful. But on a different note. Hey, a soft voice whispered to his ear, prompting Anaz to snap out of his thoughts as his head turned to meet a pair of emerald eyes that were right next to his face. He blinked several times, then looked down, suddenly aware of the position he was in. His mouth hung open in shock as a faint imaginary steam began to rise from his head, curling upward like smoke from a smoldering fire. Puff! As if something had exploded, his mind turned blank, and he finally let go of Anne, who covered her forehead while staring at him. Wah! That! I am air. But at the same time she did, she couldn't help but find her lips slowly pulling up into a smile. He looked completely different from a moment ago when he looked all serious and pensive. Staring at his dazed expression and red face, for some reason, she found him to be rather cute. But with that being said, raising her head and looking around, the smile faded from her face as she snapped her fingers in front of his face. Hey, snap out of it. People are looking. Snap, snap. However, regardless of what she did, Anaz wouldn't budge. In the end, Anne's face contorted. He was cute, but also quite stupid. What was she going to do with him? Chapter 692, Goodbye to. Quote. I can't wait to get out of this place. Same. The heat. It's really starting to get to me. Well, it's not much different in the Empire. As far as I'm concerned, summer is just about starting. If you think this heat is bad, wait until we get back. It may be hot here, but at least it's dry. Over there, it's as humid as it can get. Groans rippled through the crowd as several cadets visibly winced, their expressions twisting in discomfort. Some even looked around with a change in expression, as if thinking this place wasn't that bad after all. Thinking about it, he isn't here, so it might not be too bad if we stay here any longer. Oh, you're right. Bye. They were referring to Julian. Not everyone was aware of his death, And as such, they still took their time to mention his Jinx-like abilities, and how whenever he was present, they all ended up suffering. Thinking about it, our trip was actually quite bad. We encountered quite a few things. Maybe he's not as much of a Jinx as we previously made him out to be. You have a point. The cadets nodded in silence, feeling that the trip had indeed been quite bad, even without him being present. In that sense, perhaps they were being overly critical of him. Listening in on their conversation, Leon tried his best to hide his smile. If only they knew. Why are you smiling? Perhaps not doing a very good job at hiding his smile, or because she was rather observant. Evelyn was quick to point out his actions, prompting several people to turn in Leon's direction. Looking at Evelyn, he feigned ignorance while raising his brow. I was just happy that we were about to go back. I'm also getting tired of this place. Is that so? Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She didn't look convinced at all. In fact, the others were also not convinced. This was because he was usually the guy who would stop the conversations regarding Julian. Last they recalled, he was the one who had thrown most of the cadets out of the window during that incident. Something felt a little off, but they couldn't quite explain it. Watching them behave like that, Leon was left speechless. He opened his mouth slightly, searching for something to say, but in the end, he stayed quiet and simply glanced around instead. They were standing in a quieter, more remote part of the city. The area was nearly empty, the usual crowd nowhere in sight. Buildings rose on either side, enclosing what looked like a small plaza. A few benches lined the edges, and at the center stood a solitary sculpture, its obsidian finish gleaming under the scorching white sun. Currently, they were waiting for the Chancellor to arrive. She had told them in advance to wait for her here. Knowing that she was the only person who could bring them away, they could only comply. Oh, by the way, did any of you get any souvenirs or bones? I've managed to buy myself quite a few. I think if we end up selling them in the Empire, I'll make a good amount of money. It was surprisingly Kira who talked as she raised her hand to show a small bag that seemed to be filled to the brim with items. Aoife raised her brow. Since when did you have so much money? Wait, don't tell me. A look of shock crossed Aoife's features. What, you? Don't tell me that you sold your body. Oh, no. Kira's lips twitched, her entire expression twitching alongside her lips. With one glance, one could see that she was really struggling to remain composed. And that was the truth. Be it Aoife or Evelyn. The two of them had spent a major part of the trip trying to get her to break her character. At first, they did it because they missed the old Kira, but then it just became their source of entertainment. Even the way they addressed her changed too. Boring Kira. The fact that Kira had yet to break showed just how committed she was. Tisk. Still no reaction. And Kira also liked the expressions that Aoife and Evelyn made whenever they failed to make her break character. It was just as she was about to open her mouth to reply that a figure materialized in front of them, her long, lustrous black hair swaying faintly as her obsidian eyes locked onto them. Immediately, all noise ceased as all eyes fell on the Chancellor, who quietly looked at them before settling her gaze towards Aoife. Everyone is present, Chancellor. There is not a single person missing. As the one responsible for the third years, it was only natural that she handled the roll call. Because of that, she knew with certainty that everyone was present. Delilah nodded quietly, her thoughts unknown as she turned her head towards the distance, her brows lightly furrowed. The surroundings turned quiet once more as all the cadets looked at her, waiting for her to do something. However, even as the minutes passed, Delilah remained standing still, not moving a single muscle as the cadets started to grow more and more confused. What's going on? Is something happening? Why are we not leaving yet? Are we waiting for someone? Are we about to get ambushed? All sorts of whispers and murmurs filled the small plaza as the cadets looked at each other in confusion. Even Aoife and the others were left confused by the sudden delay. What the hell is happening? How should I know? The only one that had an inkling of the situation was Leon, who couldn't help but raise his brow in surprise. Could it be? Sure enough, not long after the thoughts entered his mind, a certain figure appeared in the distance. Leon was the first one to notice as he turned in the direction of the figure, his lips slowly pulling into a smile as Delilah's gaze also fell on him. The frown that had been marring her features slowly settled, and her usually stoic expression returned. However, if one looked closely, they'd notice a faint curling of her lips as she turned her head to look away. Hey, Leon, Evelyn called out suddenly, brushing a strand of her purple hair behind her ear as she turned toward him. Do you have any idea what's going on? Because Aoife is being pretty useless right now. Hey, it's true, though, Evelyn shrugged, giving Aoife a look that seemed to say, no lies were told here. Aoife was just about to snap back with a retort when her eyes suddenly followed Leon's gaze, and then she saw it. In an instant, her expression shifted. No, it didn't just shift. Her face drained of all color, going pale as chalk. It was the kind of look someone had when they saw something they were never meant to. Like she had just seen a ghost. This sudden change confused Evelyn. What's up with you? Why? However, she was quick to realize the reason for the change, as her face also showed similar changes. That, Evelyn started to stutter, the words seemingly not getting out. You two can stop. I'm not falling for it. Looking at them, Kira rolled her eyes. She could see what they were trying to do from miles away. This was probably going to be another annoying trick to piss her off. However, her thoughts changed rather quickly as she noticed that Aoife and Evelyn weren't the only ones who were showing similar looks. Kalian, Amael, and even the usually cold Keys started showing similar expressions of shock as they stared in the same direction as everyone. Is everyone in it together? What's going on? Unable to hold her curiosity any longer, Kira finally turned her head, and it was in the exact moment that she turned her head that her eyes locked onto a figure she was all too familiar with. With a face that was evenly proportioned on all sides, and skin that was devoid of any blemishes, he looked no inferior to Leon. His eyes were sharp, and his dark hair swayed gently with each step that he took. However, the most striking feature of his was his deep hazel eyes that seemed to arrogantly look down on anything they set their eyes on. It was as if all noise had been stripped away from the surroundings as all eyes fell on the figure that they hadn't seen in so long. And then, just as the silence seemed to stretch for an eternity, Julian raised his hand, greeting everyone as though he had just come back from a small trip. How have you all been? Silence. Julian's words were met with silence as all eyes remained trained on him. Some were more shocked than others, while others were at a complete loss. But in the end, swoosh, a shadow blurred, and a figure appeared before Julian, her hands outstretched before latching onto him. Thud, the two of them fell onto the ground as Julian looked at Kira in surprise. She actually cared this much about him. He was at a loss. I'll kill you, quote. But it soon became clear to him that he was overthinking, as he felt a pair of hands latched onto his throat. Quote. Fucker, you're supposed to be dead. I'll kill you. Kira didn't bother lowering her voice, she spoke. Clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The force behind her words cut through the silence, and several people snapped out of their stupor all at once, blinking as if suddenly yanked back to reality. Flustered, Julian tried to speak. Wait, hold on, He didn't even get a few more words out until another figure appeared, dashing in his direction before jumping next to Kira and latching onto his throat as well. Let me help. Aoife, me too. Evelyn, same. Keys. Before Julian knew it, a crowd had formed around him, all of whom looked incredibly angry at him as they grabbed onto his throat and tried to strangle him. Not expecting such a reaction, Julian desperately looked around before settling his gaze onto Leon, who stared at him in silence. Help me. Leon eventually smiled, taking a step forward as he moved towards Julian. Julian's eyes lit up as soon as he saw Leon move. As expected of my knight. He wasn't useless after all. If you want to strangle him, at least put some effort into it. How about we have the body users do the strangling while the mages keep him sealed? Julian's eyes widened upon hearing his words. However, Leon didn't care at all as he continued to give out orders. Make sure when you strangle him, you block his airways. It's important that he can't breathe. Quote. Quote. Chapter 693, Return to Empire 1. Evanus' household. Moonlight poured into the quiet office, casting a pale glow across the room. A lone figure sat by the window, gently twirling a wine cup between his fingers. Noel's eyes were locked on the distant moon, reflecting its pale glow in his eyes. Whatever thoughts stirred behind that gaze remained his alone. Eventually, he drew his gaze away from the window and lifted the cup to his lips. The rich taste of the wine lingered on his tongue as he closed his eyes, savoring the moment in silence. He didn't particularly like wine or alcohol. He drank not because of taste, but out of necessity. With his heart missing, he lived every day in pain. Some days he could bear the pain, but there were other days when the pain was simply too much for him. This was such a day. From time to time, Noel's body would twitch as he tried his best to suppress the pain. However, as hard as he could, the pain continued to linger, clawing at his chest and mind continuously. It was only when he drank the wine that he was able to somewhat forget the pain, as his usually stoic face showed signs of melting. Taking another sip of the wine, Noel lowered his head to stare at his own reflection. Towards the reflection that displayed a face that wasn't his own. He should be done by now. It had been quite a while since Emmett had gone to the mirror dimension, and according to his estimates, if nothing went wrong, he should have been able to collect the eye. Not only that, but he should have also learned about the outer beings. A small smile played on his lips as he thought about Emmett while his reflection rippled. I bet he's probably angry at me for not telling him everything. Noel could practically imagine Emmett cursing at him for not telling him everything and stringing him along. Noel certainly could have told him everything, but where was the fun in that? It was much better to show him than to tell him. Either way, all of it won't matter once he gets his true memories back. It wouldn't be long before that happened. Swoosh. Right then, a sudden shift occurred, and the curtains billowed as a strong wind suddenly swept into the room despite the closed windows. Unfazed by the strange occurrence, Noel slowly lifted his head and stared at the figure that had just appeared before him. It was as if the sun had descended before him, flooding the surroundings in an overwhelming, radiant light. It was overwhelming enough to cause any regular person to go blind. And yet, Noel didn't seem to be affected at all by the light. But was that truly the case? Upon closer look, his eyes shifted from light blue to normal and back again, continuously repairing themselves under the bright light, which gradually faded to reveal the silhouette of a figure whose features remained hidden. Noel took a sip of his wine as he stared at the figure before him. I take it that he's managed to collect the eye. Quote ellipsis dot. He has. A soft voice replied to him shortly after. Not only that, but he was also able to almost take down a primordial ranked being. I was prepared to step in at any moment, considering how I owe you, but he was able to take care of the matter before I even had the chance to step in. He's impressive. Yes, he is. Noel took another sip of his wine, trying his best to hide the smile that threatened to form at any given second. So she still is unaware of his real identity. This was a good thing. Noel never planned on revealing it considering how he still didn't trust this woman. In fact, he didn't trust any of the other gods. He is now leaving the remnant south. He should be back to you soon. This is all that I needed to say. Oh, and a powerful woman came in the end. She was the one who actually took care of the primordial ranked being. Powerful woman. Noel's hand paused, his brow raising up as he looked at Panthea. He was unaware of this part. Yes. Panthea nodded quietly, her gaze falling on Noel as she described to him her appearance and power. It didn't take long for Noel to understand the situation as he closed his eyes and pursed his lips. In the end, you couldn't help yourself, huh? Noel didn't know what to do with his brother. On one hand, he was annoyed given how he had instructed him to remain quiet. On the other hand, he also understood why he did it. It wasn't even because he was too emotional. Knowing his brother best, Emmett most likely gave hints about himself as a sort of backup plan if he ended up losing himself in his own act. Given how he was pursuing the 5th level of emotive magic, Noel was aware of the challenges that he had to take in order to reach such a level. This was why Noel wasn't too angry. In the end, he owed his brother too much to be angry. Thankfully, the situation was still manageable. But on a different note, who would have thought my cold brother of all people would have a woman be his backup plan in case he lost himself in his own act? Noel suddenly felt that the situation was quite interesting. Of course, it was only a fleeting thought as he looked at Panthea once more. She was currently staring at him in silence, her expression impossible to read under the bright glow that enveloped her. In the end, her voice drifted into the room not long after. How is the situation with Torin? He's currently busy handling other matters. He won't be making any major moves in the upcoming days. However, I can't guarantee that it will remain like this for long. Thinking about Torin, Noel's heart sank. The situation within the Church of Oricleus was currently quite dire. All sorts of people were flocking to the area, demanding a new saint candidate following several incidents that occurred involving him. The backlash had gotten so bad that even the Round Table had no choice but to step in. Everything, of course, was a result of Torin's actions. But at the same time, he also most likely figured out the truth behind the incident, or was close to it. He's now probably waiting for the saint of the church to fully absorb the blood before taking it for himself and then looking for Emmett. Noel understood that they didn't have much time. From the moment Emmett came back, they'd have to make preparations for Torin's arrival. Thinking about what was about to come, Noel closed his eyes for a brief moment before looking at Panthea once more. He quietly stood up as he did so, placing the wine cup by the side. Considering how you've helped me out this time, we can consider our debt repaid. Okay. Panthea merely nodded her head at the statement. This was all that she wanted to hear. In that case, I shall take my leave. Gradually, her figure started to fade as the bright glow that once enveloped the room started to dim. However, right as she was about to leave, she recalled something and stopped. I advise you not to look for your heart. As far as I'm aware, Ivanth appears to be guarding it. You'll have an incredibly hard time getting it back if it's truly him who is guarding the heart. The moment the word reached Noel's ears, her figure vanished completely, leaving the room in total silence as he stood frozen in place. Eventually, his fists clenched together tightly as his expression threatened to change. However, after a few deep breaths, he regained his composure, his expression settling into a cold indifference as he eased back into his seat. Tap, 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 his fingers drummed across the table as his eyes flickered. Ivanth. Help. Looking around in despair, I had a hard time breathing. I could see hands reaching out for my throat in all directions, and when I turned to look at Leon, instead of helping me, he appeared to be giving them tips on how to strangle me. Audacious knight, traitorous bastard, I should have sold you when I had the chance. Leon merely stared at me, his lips pulling into a soft smile as he pushed several cadets my way. At the same time, I saw him mouth something like, I'm nothing but a failure, right? In that case, what does it matter if I do this? He continued to push people my way as I started to despair. No wonder everything had gone bad. He was here all along. Damn it, no wonder. Fucking Jinx. Wait, what? Lifting my head up, I looked around. Who said that? Jinx. Me. I wanted to push myself to have a good talk with whoever said that. However, I couldn't quite pinpoint who said it as the number of people who were trying to assault me increased. And it also seemed like it wasn't just one person. Which bastards? Uke. Eventually, I turned my head towards Delilah, who stared at me in silence. Yet again, she said nothing. She just stared at me. However, just for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a slight curl of her lips as my eyes widened. This woman. The curl disappeared right as it appeared, but I knew what I saw as I glared at her. That probably wasn't the best decision, as I saw her brow raise and her expression cool off rather quickly. I pressed my lips tightly and turned my head away. Right, okay, fine, considering everything that I had done, I was going to concede just for now. But only now, by the time we came back to the EMP. It's good that you're back. Right then, a certain voice whispered into my ear, and my thoughts came to an abrupt stop. Lifting my head up, I saw the others looking at me with a mix of different expressions as the strangling subsided and they all looked at me. It's really good that you're back. ... It's nice. It really is good. In the end, closing my eyes, I leaned my head back. Yeah, it's good to be back. Chapter 694, Return to Empire 2. So you are saying that you were that guy all along? ... Yes. Arriving at Virath Anish, before continuing our journey back to the Empire, Delilah granted us a few hours of rest. This wasn't merely due to her kindness, but also because some of the cadets needed some time in order to recuperate from the long teleportation. I was generally fine, but I did feel a little nauseous. Long-distance teleportation took quite a heavy toll on a person's body. I could only imagine how big of a toll Delilah's body took. Is she okay? I'm sure she's fine. She didn't show much of a reaction. But what if? Before I knew it, I found myself worrying about her. This was something that I couldn't help. In general, these couple of hours would do good for me too. But there was still one issue. So you're also that weird Lazarus guy who these people claim to be a merchant pirate? You became a pirate? ... The sudden onslaught of questions was starting to get to me. The emotional reunion that I had expected never materialized. Rather, I was immediately strangled before suddenly being reminded of my time back when I was here. Back when I was Lazarus the merchant, who somehow ended up being a pirate, and a sort of legend within this city. The one who defied the light was what they called Lazarus. Just thinking about it made me wince. Wait, how do they even know all of this? Actually, thinking about it, it probably wasn't hard to know. In the end, we all managed to enter a more spacious bar where all the cadets sat around as they bombarded me with questions. Keck. ... Kook. Of course, the topic still lingered on my pirate days. So what did you do as a pirate? Did you go to other ships and take their loot? Haha, I bet that you managed to get a lot of loot. Yeah, a lot of. Right then, everyone paused, and the previous smiles suddenly faded as realization dawned on them. Staring at their reaction, I immediately got a bad feeling as I shook my head. No, I didn't loot anything. I have my own morals. I could tell from just a glance that they were eyeing my money. But no, I wasn't going to give it to them. Then what about all the bones you were selling not too long ago? My lip twitched as I looked at Leon. The more I looked at him, the more useless he seemed to me. I was just about to open my mouth to say, I should have sold you, and whatnot, but recalling the time when he insulted me in the past, I hastily shut my mouth. Right, he'll just say I overuse my jokes, and how I wasn't funny and all that. For clarification, I didn't. And even if I did, it didn't matter. What mattered was my delivery, and my delivery was great. At the very least, it was leagues better than Leon's. So, you seriously didn't plunder any unlucky soul? If you don't have money, how did you manage to survive? No, how did you even get here before us? At Aoife's sudden question, the atmosphere turned quiet. Right, how was he here before us? It makes no sense at all. Looking at everyone and seeing the confusion on their faces, I replied rather quickly. Actually, I was on a secret mission. I had been thinking about how to explain the entire ordeal to them for a while, knowing that I was going to reunite with them eventually. The answer was simple. The Chancellor sent me on a mission to scout the area before you guys. It was part of my graduation mission. The reason why she sent me first is because, as the Black Star, my evaluation is a bit different. Ah, that makes sense. Right, why didn't I think of that? Many of the cadets bought my excuse as they all snapped up their fingers in understanding. Of course, that was merely for those who were unaware of my supposed death. Those who were aware all looked at me in silence, their gazes digging into me. I could only pretend not to see their expressions as I talked with the other cadets. However, staring at everyone who was speaking to me, asking me questions, some smiling, some laughing, I couldn't help but feel that the scene was strange. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that this would happen in my first year. I thought back to my first year in the world. Those had probably been my hardest days. During those days, it felt as though the entire world was against me, and I was fighting against it in order to survive. I shut everything around me and just focused on myself. But then, somewhere, sometime, everything changed. The cadets no longer appeared scared of me. I was also not scared or against interacting with them. Looking at the comfortable smiles as I talked to them, I realized just how much had changed since the first year. Was it them who changed, or was it me? Maybe it's both. Whatever the case was, this was kind of nice. While the atmosphere was nice and all, it still ended up tiring me out by the time the second hour clocked in. Feeling a headache starting to form, I excused myself and went out of the bar, wandering about the city that I had once lived in for a bit of time. Memories of the time I was Lazarus resurfaced in my mind as I walked around the bazaar, now a lot quieter than before, until I eventually came to a stop in front of a familiar place. This was where I worked for a while. I called it the Grey Chamber Merchant Group. I sold a lot of things. So you did end up making a lot of money. I lost it all. Feeling my lips pull up, I turned around to see a pair of gray eyes staring directly at me. While his appearance was a little different since we were outside, his eyes were still the same, and so was his voice. I take it that you're here because you're not satisfied with the answer I previously gave. The one about you being here on a secret mission. Ha, I let out a soft laugh. I take it that I'm right. Well, this didn't surprise me. The excuse wasn't exactly the greatest, and knowing Leon, he was probably curious as to why I had to fake my own death. I thought about telling him the truth, but I don't know. Leon. I thought back to how his name was Noel, inverted, and everything that Noel had done to him in the past. From teaching him to guiding him to some extent. I knew that Noel wouldn't simply name him Leon and guide him for no reason. He had plans for Leon, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Perhaps, when I get back, I should consider asking Noel. But whether Noel would give me an answer or not was an entirely different matter. That bastard. Nope, I'm not interested in knowing what you did. Surprisingly, Leon shook his head, prompting me to raise my brow. You aren't. No, not really. Leon scratched the side of his neck as I replied. You probably have your own reasons, and I've been quite busy recently. Life as a prince isn't as easy as one might think. Oh, right, I was suddenly reminded of this guy's other identity. Right, he is a prince, isn't he? A lot of politics and attempted assassinations. Life without you is quite hectic. You can say that this trip to the mirror dimension has been one of the most relaxing times of my life. Is that so? Good for him, I guess. In that case, do you want to be my knight again? No, fuck that. There was not even a hint of hesitation in Leon's voice. It kind of hurt. It's not like I treated him badly or anything like that. Save from the occasional, "I'll sell you" comment, I felt that I treated him well. The one who treated him badly was the other Julian. Even if I wanted to be your knight, now that my identity has been revealed, it's impossible. It'll create a mess of the Verdant Empire. The chaos will be pretty big, and Leon suddenly stopped mid-sentence, covering his mouth as he looked at me. Now that I think about it, that does sound pretty entertaining. His lip pulled up slightly as I took a step back. What the hell is going on? I thought he hadn't changed while I was gone, but he certainly did. Looking at him and seeing the expression he was making while thinking about the possible chaos his actions would bring, I started to have a bad feeling. Say, Leon looked at me, his eyes flickering. On second though, fuck that. I cut him off before he could even get his words out. You're fired. I'm not even hired. Doesn't matter. You're fired. Don't even think about it. Tisk. Leon clicked his tongue, and then the two of us paused. Briefly after that, we both smiled. Well, only briefly, as we both started to cringe. Ook, never again. Yes. By the time it was all said and done, the two of us returned to the group, and we soon headed back toward the meeting spot where Delilah was waiting. The meeting spot was located a little bit off the main city, in a more desolate area near the cliff where one could still hear the raging waters of the Crimson Sea smash against the cliff. As I stood by the group, I saw her gaze linger over everyone but me as she snapped her fingers. Is everyone ready? The moment Delilah asked the question, she was met with several nods as some of the cadets paled, some even holding onto their stomachs. Not that Delilah seemed to care as she suddenly raised her hand and snapped it. Snap. One by one, the cadets began to fade before my eyes, disappearing right in front of me. I stared at the sight, waiting for my turn to inevitably arrive, but as the cadets faded one by one, I felt a sinking feeling. One that became glaring the moment everyone disappeared from view, leaving behind a pair of obsidian eyes staring directly at me. Splash, splash. The crashing of the raging water against the cliff echoed louder than ever as I stared at Delilah. A question arose in my mind at that moment. To jump, or not to jump? Chapter 695, Return to Empire 3. Okay, it's not too tall. Taking a step back, I looked behind me. I was currently standing by the edge of a cliff, the sound of the waves splashing behind me as I carefully analyzed the distance between me and the water. It was about 30 meters. That was pretty tall. I'll still survive. I can just slow down my fall, and once I enter the water, it won't really matter since I can now breathe underwater thanks to Anne's teachings. The plan was set, and I was ready to go through with it. But there was only one problem. Staring at the woman who stood opposite me, and feeling just how powerful she was, I knew that even if I followed through with my actions, it was impossible for me to run away from her. She'd just snap her finger, and I'd appear before her again. In that case, should I use the Eye of Oricleus? I inwardly shook my head. That was a bit too dangerous. Furthermore, things weren't that bad. Then, are you thinking of jumping? Considering I stopped mid-sentence, turning my head in Delilah's direction. She can talk. Her brow slowly raised upon seeing my expression. Come, I coughed, trying my best to ease my expression. I'm not. I took a step forward for good measure. See, ellipsis. Delilah just stared at me quietly, her expression the same as it was before. The more I was subjected to her stare, the more uncomfortable I grew. Questions started to flood my mind. What does she want? Why did she suddenly stop me and not bring the others? I thought we had already talked. Did she have something else to say? Or is she going to ask me why I did everything that I did? If that's the case, how should I answer? My thoughts swam in all sorts of directions. They consumed my mind so much that I didn't notice Delilah slowly approach me. By the time I did, she was already before me. Ah, her eyes were now leveled to mine. Something that I only just recently noticed. Before, I used to have to look up to her. But now, we were practically the same height. I had grown a little since the first time that I met her, and as I looked at her, I felt unable to tear my eyes away from her. She was just so beautiful. By the time I realized I had muttered the words out loud, it was already too late, as I brought my hand to my mouth. Realizing my mistake, I looked at Delilah, only to see her look completely unfazed. The atmosphere turned awkward from that point. At the very least, until she spoke again. Finish your word. Wait, what? Delilah was now staring at me with a frown, a clear look of dissatisfaction marring her features. She looked kind of angry. Finish it. Finish what? Say it. I pursed my lips, looking at Delilah in confusion. However, feeling her gaze and looking deeply into her eyes, I could only sigh before saying. Beautiful. What is? Quote ellipsis dot question mark. Quote. The hell? I stopped the moment I noticed the subtle shift in her expression. Thinking back, this wasn't the first time she had made me do something like this. Recalling the old times, a smile unconsciously formed on my lips as I relented. You what? You're really needy, aren't you? Quote ellipsis dot question mark. Say it. You're beautiful. Again. Sir, you're beautiful. Again. You're beautiful. Again. You're beautiful. I didn't know how many times I was forced to say the same thing over and over again. I was also sure that Delilah had heard the same two words many times in the past. There was no denying her beauty. And yet, even though she had probably heard those same two words more times than I could count, she kept insisting that I say them. And so I did. Again. You're beautiful. The fact that she wanted me to say them meant something. I liked that. I liked her. So, I was fine with saying it. Enough. Delilah eventually stopped me, her face looking as indifferent as usual. However, I knew that behind that indifferent expression was a satisfied one. The subtle curve in her lips told me all that I needed to know. I take it that you're satisfied, right? A little. Delilah replied slowly. A little, she reaffirmed, prompting me to laugh a little. What was I supposed to do with this woman? The more time I spent with her, the more I struggled to understand her. But, it wasn't like I didn't like it. Alright, in that case, if you need me to say it again, I'll be there. Of course. Delilah nodded as if it was a given that I'd do this again. I could only smile helplessly at her. Of course. Yes, of course. Seemingly satisfied, Delilah turned back, her black hair fluttering slightly under the light breeze as she brought her hand up to stop it. I lost myself in the sight. But that was only for a brief moment as Delilah's voice reached my ears again. I recently got engaged. The words hit me like a lightning bolt, yanking me out of my thoughts. I snapped my gaze to Delilah, a sudden pang tightening in my chest. What did she just say? She got engaged. When? No, it probably happened during the time that I was missing. Why did she get engaged? All sorts of questions flooded my mind. As I looked at Delilah, scanning her face. However, looking at her, I wasn't able to spot a thing as her expression turned serious. My father insisted that I get married. I thought back to the conversation that I had back in the Evanis household with her father. He indeed wanted her to get married, but there was no way that he'd be able to force her to get married. How did he convince her? No, why did she agree? He said that getting married would help me get rid of suitors. I felt breathless listening to her words. I understood what she was saying. Orson had most likely insisted that she get married, given how many households and people were trying to get married to her. Given that I died, she most likely ended up accepting one of the offers. I accepted. As expected, my heart sank further into my stomach, and as I looked at her, I saw her slowly raise her hand to expose a ring that rested right on her finger. This is the ring of my fiancé. Oh, I didn't even feel like looking at the ring. I could tell it was probably nice. Look at it. However, for some reason, Delilah insisted that I look at it, and I did. As opposed to the fancy ring that I expected to see, the ring looked rather plain. It was entirely black and felt vaguely familiar. I told my father that I'm engaged, and showed him this as proof. The more I looked at the ring, the more familiar it felt to me. It was really familiar. And then, slowly lowering my head to stare at my own hand, I saw it. The ring that was on my finger. It looked exactly the same. Wow, what? Then, slowly lifting my head up to stare at her, I saw her lips slowly pull up into a really unfamiliar, teasing smile. Hello fiancé. My head exploded. UGKH. Quote ellipsis dot. If you're going to puke, Puke over there. Don't puke close to me. As the cadets endured yet another round of teleportation, the weaker ones doubled over, vomiting where they stood. The disorientation stumbled around like some sort of drunkards. Thankfully, they had landed in what appeared to be a forest, and so there was plenty of space to vomit. Leon, make sure to stay alert. Of course, while the weaker ones were puking, the ones who were doing better immediately moved around the perimeter and carefully scanned the surroundings. With all of their training, they understood just how dangerous the mirror dimension was. They couldn't afford to lower their guard for a single second, and so, Aoife got to work as she ordered the others to keep a check of their surroundings while the others recovered. If you spot anything, quickly report it. Do it as we've done before. Her words were met with several grunts as Leon scanned the surroundings, his eyes knit together tightly. As he looked around, he couldn't help but wonder something. Where is Julian? They were all supposed to have arrived at the same time. And yet, he appeared to be completely gone. Where could he have gone? It's not just him. The Chancellor is also not here. Did something happen? Leon's eyes narrowed as his thoughts paused there. Swoosh. His thoughts came to an abrupt halt as two figures eventually appeared in the middle of the group. Chancellor. It's the Chancellor. The moment Delilah appeared, everyone relaxed. With her present, there was no longer a need to be on guard. On the other hand, Leon focused his gaze on Julian. Something about him felt off. He looked to be in a daze. No, it almost feels like he has lost all reason. His eyes and face were both blank, and he simply stared at the sky. Something was indeed off. Looking around, Leon quietly approached Julian and pulled him to the side. Is everything okay? Despite the question, Julian didn't answer. What? He just made weird noises and looked completely out of it. Oi, hey. Leon shook him again, trying to get him to snap out of it, and it was only after a solid minute that Julian's eyes regained some sort of clarity as he looked at Leon. Oh, it's you. Julian's voice was rather slurred. Yes, it's me. What is wrong with you? Did something happen? No, nothing like that. Julian quietly dismissed him, raising his hand to show him his hand. Look at this. He pointed at the ring on his finger, prompting Leon to raise his brow. He felt that the ring was strangely familiar. But the next words that came out of Julian's mouth made him freeze. I'm engaged, apparently. Slowly blinking his eyes, Leon's mind froze for a moment. Then, as if finally recalling where he had seen the ring before, his head slowly turned in the direction of the Chancellor. That was when he saw it. The same identical ring on her finger. His face immediately grew stoic.